Streaming. Let's see what happens. It looks like YouTube believes that we are live. Incredible. Okay, well, welcome back.
Are we on the same link?
No, we are not on the same link.
Oh, okay. That's why I could not find us. Sorry, I'm also.
All good.
Do you have the link?
Yes, I will. Okay, the easiest way for me to share it is just to tweet it. Okay, we
Sounds great.
had some problems and had to restart, but Okie and I are now live to discuss the death and life of great American cities. I have to do something, right? I don't know.
I like that we're starting the live stream with us tweeting about the live stream, so that I can also find the live stream.
Correct.
That I am currently on.
That you're currently. Yep.
Technology has come full circle.
We are so professional. We do.
I hope no one knows that this is how we make our living.
That we actually.
Not this, but this set of skills.
Correct. This specifically, no, but also yes. This is. We are relying on the skills that we use to pay our bills here, and it's fine. Don't worry about it. Okay. Well. Welcome to whatever this is. We usually have one, maybe two people actually watching us live, so I'm not really that pressed about it. Thank you to shout out to Colby, our lone pal. Can you do me a favor and drop the link into the nonfiction?
That's what I'm.
Okay,
yep.
Cool. I can't do anything because we're currently streaming via Discord, so I can't. If I start clicking around,
I'm gonna.
If I start clicking around in Discord, it does bad.
Yeah, I will do that. Again, this is the scintillating content. I don't care, Discord. Okay. Technical.
I think I had also set this new stream to unlisted when I started it, which was also really helpful for our purposes. I have fixed that. So, okay. Well, while we wait for friends to find us, to join us, whatever, I don't know, man. We're here again. We're back again to do Nonfiction Book Club, where we're very professional. We've missed a bunch.
Only the most
professional. We missed a bunch this year, and I feel like that has us especially off our game. That's the excuse that I am gonna make for us. Hello, Colby, our dear friend, the one and only.
Thank you.
Thank you
for helping us know whether or not we were heard.
Yes. Now we can begin. Now that Colby's here. So okay. Well, this month we're talking about the death and life of great American cities. Should we introduce ourselves? That was a step that we used to do once upon a time.
Yes,
I am Nicole Sweeney. We're on my YouTube channel. I have a degree in sociology, and so I pick books about social sciences typically. That's it.
And I'm Deboki, and my background is in bioengineering, so usually I end up picking more sciencey or hard sciencey, physical, life sciencey kind of books. Mm-hmm. Which weirdly, this book ended up being
she got
a little bit up. Yeah, she sure did.
She snuck a little bit of stuff for you, and Deboki can have a little life sciences as a treat.
Yes, a little bonus if she makes it to the end of the book.
Yes,
she'll get to enjoy this section.
If Deboki makes
and the good news is I made it to the end of the book.
Incredible.
Like 30 minutes ago.
It's a 600-page book. There's a lot of book. Yeah. I mean, it's short though. It's the 600 pages. Yeah. So, anyway,
This is my version of the book. My
Oh,
ad
okay.
currently is for a 4 book bundle called the Darcy Brothers. But if I seem like even more scattered with my notes, like it's because I read it on ebook because I'm traveling and I didn't want to like have to bring home a 600-page
Sure.
book or like
Yeah.
travel. So I read it on Kindle and like it was a very strange, like it definitely made me appreciate like why for all of the nonfiction book club books I've been doing the physical reading or like reading on the
Yeah.
physical book, like being able to take notes and highlighting and everything. It's just like, ah, not the same.
It's not the same. It's not the
I
same.
do like my Kindle otherwise, but like for this
For
specific
yeah,
thing,
for
it
like
was,
for the kind of
yeah,
note taking and stuff that we're doing here, it's not
yeah,
ideal. Uh,
yeah,
so the Death and Life of Great American Cities was published in 1961. I feel like that's really important, like for like the thing one to note about this book. But
yes,
it is essentially, I don't know. It's basically like here is what makes cities great, and here's why city planners suck at making cities great. Right? That's like
yep,
the book in a tweet is that. Uh,
yeah.
um, so
Yeah, sort of theory of cities and then like the why people are so bad at this
at
theory.
this theory of cities, and like it's interesting because yeah, basically she's like that we keep an obsession towards organization, towards like trying to put things in like in very neat, orderly fashion is often very contrary to what makes cities work. I am really curious to hear if you had any like we'll get not immediately we'll get to this, but just because you've been traveling so much lately, this like discussion of cities is really interesting. I also realized while reading this book that I have not lived in like a city in like the in a city that is, you know, large enough to be called a city in a decade at least. So as I was reading this, I was like, I'm a little out of touch with the material right now, so it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I that too because like I have like lived outside of a city, like so. I mean, now I live well, not now. Usually, I live outside of a city. Like in my more recent experience living in like Western Massachusetts, definitely not super city like. But before that, like my main city experiences were Boston, a very little bit of New York. And then I guess like I grew up outside of LA and outside of Rochester, New York, but otherwise like Boston and New York feel like my main like significant city experiences. But yeah, so like coming to Oslo is my first time in a city in a while, and it's like not necessarily that like it's not like on New York levels or anything. So like it feels like yeah, I don't know. It still feels big to me just compared to how I've been living the past few years.
Yes, yes, I feel that. I
Yeah.
okay. I think I was trying to figure out like what made the most sense in terms of how to break down her like her
Yeah.
argument, and I'm just gonna like map through. So she talks first. I'm like literally looking at the table of contents just to like summarize this because I
Yeah.
realized that my tweetable version of this is maybe not useful if you didn't read the book. So if you're coming to this, if you're just joining us to hear us talk about it. So part one, the peculiar nature of cities. She breaks down like constituent, like what are the things that make up a city, and then dedicates a chapter to sidewalks. Actually, she dedicates 3 separate chapters to sidewalks. So there's sidewalk safety is thing one, sidewalk contact. I don't know how to describe the sidewalk contact chapter, like what the argument is there, what the point is. I'll loop back on that, put a pin in that. And then use of sidewalks assimilating children, which she basically talks about like urban children, like like if you live in a city and you're a kid, the amount of time that you are going to spend on a sidewalk. She does that before getting into the next chapter, which is the use of neighborhood parks, and then finally city neighborhoods, and those 5 things being like distinguishing features of cities. I mean, really, it's sidewalks, 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 and then parks, and then to like the idea of city neighborhoods, and like neighborhoods as organizing principles, both for like neighborhoods as organizing principles, both in like very loose conceptual terms of understanding segments of a city, but also in like organizing principles in like the political sense too of neighborhoods as organizing bodies. So the second part of the book is the conditions for diversity. This is like a really central theme throughout the book, is the idea that a need for diversity in many, many understandings of that word. She means that word in like the broadest possible way, but that like diversity in all the ways you can take that word to mean is essential for a city, or for her understanding of a city, I guess. I don't know. And so the diversity part is broken down into what are the things that generate diversity, the need for mixed primary uses. And so again, she means diversity very broadly here. So mixed primary uses meaning like buildings, like what are the different, like a building, you have like a shop front on the first floor, apartments, maybe a couple office buildings, then some office buildings, a shop front, some offices, and maybe like some apartments. That's a really like rudimentary understanding of what is meant here, but like, mixed primary uses, the need for small blocks. So like the having frequent opportunities to turn, and not be like stuck on a straightaway for an extended period of time. Again, sidewalks, man. She's got a lot to say about sidewalks. The need for aged buildings. The gist of her point here in the need for aged buildings is that if you can't have like real turnover if everything is new, because new construction is expensive. It's expensive for it. You have to pay the costs of building a new building, and that those costs will be paid by someone, and whether in the form of the rents, in the form of the cost of services in the businesses, whatever. And so you need to have buildings of a variety of ages, basically, is her argument. You need to have older buildings for like lower rent businesses, and lower rent apartments, whatever, and then new construction as well. You need to have a mix of the two. The need for concentration. Oh, people, like concentration of people.
Yeah.
Yes. The need for concentration of people. And again, this is like back to the mixed use thing too, though, like where you can't just another like big recurring theme is like having districts that are like, this is a business district and this is a residential district, is like contrary to like it is harmful to both, because what you're creating is spaces where where the traffic is not like constant, where you have like significant lulls, which it makes it sort of impossible for like businesses to operate in those places, and also goes back to, again, her obsession with sidewalks. Like a big part of sidewalk safety is having people in a place consistently, and it's not the more people that you have in a place, the safer the sidewalks become, is sort of like the gist of it. The more consistently you have people in a place. And then forces of decline and regeneration, self-destruction of diversity. That is when it gets too, like when a place like pops off too much. I don't know why that was my, but the competition, basically, if it becomes too diverse, too appealing, you then gentrification, basically, is what happens there. The curse of border vacuums. This was the bit about railroad tracks, like railroads, but I don't really remember. I think we're entering into, I had to confess to Naboki when we hopped on today that I got up early to finish the book this morning, and I was listening to the audio while also reading the book, but I definitely dozed off. So there's some sections in here that I don't know that I read. So anyway, okay, well, part 3 is all of the ways, but the forces for decline and regeneration. And like the broader theme here, right, is the things that contribute to the decline of a place are also the things that can, like, it's a too much of a thing or too little of a thing, whatever. That is how you get to things getting worse or things getting better. is the gist of it.
Yeah.
And then different tactics. Her final section: subsidized dwellings, erosion of cities, or attrition of automobiles. That was one of my favorite sections. She was talking about the way in which you, like, cars, like, destroying cities, but like a little bit at a time. Like, you don't suddenly arbitrarily decide we're going to prepare to have 5 times as many cars and just build a shit ton of new roads. It's like a gradual thing where you're like, seems like we have more cars, let's add more car space. But the more car space you add, the more the cars are just parasites on a city, basically. Is the gist of that chapter. Visual order, its limitations and possibilities, salvaging projects, governing and planning districts, and then the kind of problem a city is. That's actually, the last chapter is my favorite because, and this is the thing that I wish that I would love to read more of. And so if anybody has recommendations of this kind, but the last chapter, she talks about the idea of cities as nature and like the idea of like the way in which we treat, like, you know, cities and like large concentrations of people as antithetical to nature, but like nature is good and pure, and then there's these masses of people who are bad and like unnatural, but like we are part of nature, like I don't know, and like our creations are also part of the world. And so I don't know, I really appreciated that chapter. I thought it was very beautiful and I liked it a lot. Where should we start? So that's the book. I've summarized the book now in great detail. So where do we start?
I feel like I'm still processing this book. Like, I felt like as I was reading it, I was like, it was like very much like overload. Like, I felt like I don't know if you've ever, like, it kind of felt like sitting at a dinner table with someone who has like hit upon their like passion project in the conversation.
Yes.
And you're like trying to keep up with them. And it's like very exciting, but you're also like at some point like, I need to slow down. Where like this book also reminded me a lot of what's the one? Oh, the surveillance capitalism book.
Oh, interesting.
Where it's like that's like, but that one was definitely written in a much more academic language, whereas this was a much more approachable language. I still had a hard time wrapping my head around a lot of the ideas, especially there's like a set of chapters where she talks a lot about funding for projects and how these things relate to like what gets funded, but like the kind of systems that form around money. And some of those chapters I ended up getting a little bit like, I don't know anymore. Like the early stuff, like the sidewalk stuff, I was like, I get it. Like I always think about like when I was in New York, like the place that felt the most uncomfortable to me was in Williamsburg, like among all these like super fancy like apartment buildings, because like that was the one place I went to in New York where it was like there was no one. Like it's the quietest street, and it just like freaked me out. Whereas like everywhere else, there's always people around, so you feel like I'm good, like, you know, like there's someone there. And like that's a lot of what the premise of that chapter is. It's like kind of like how do we set up like how cities can, and like this is the thing that I found super interesting, the way that she like described specifics about like how you should even like structure a city street to make this kind of safety possible, because the idea is sort of like this informal surveillance, not necessarily to be like I'm gonna like you're not like the police or anything. It's the idea is just like everyone's looking out for each other, and like people might not know everyone on the street, but there's just like this like kind of setup that makes it easy for everyone to sort of like know what's going on without also necessarily being all up in everyone's business either. Like there's like that kind of balance. Like that comes up a lot too with like the idea of like how kids get raised in cities, where there's like people around, or like there's she calls them like characters or primary characters. Is that
primary characters in a neighborhood, being like people who are consistently there. And that's the other thing too, is it's like there's a lot of people, but some number of those people need to be regular fixtures. So like they might be a shot, like she talks a lot about her specific block, like that's a touchstone, which, you know, for the obvious reason of it's a place that she knows well, right? And
Yeah.
so there's, like a store owner who's like a major fixture, and obviously has a vested interest in like making sure that the space in front of his store
Yeah.
is like as a place that people feel comfortable being. There's like there's people who like live in the space above and are sort of like looking down.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the idea, you have to have some people who are consistently there enough to have like a a baseline vibe check for the street, like this is what is the usual, what is typical here, and
Yeah.
then and like can spot aberrations. And yeah, it's interesting because there is something very like there's some of the ways that she describes it are like the language gets very, I don't know, panopticon-y, but like
Yeah.
she is not in, like none of this is oh, have like police, like that's not, it's like
Yeah.
the whole point is if you have a neighborhood of people who are engaged, like that's the like the actual answer to like safe neighborhoods is like the people who live in those neighborhoods, taking care of one another. I just read last week A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, for another
Mhm.
book club discussion. YouTube.com/It's Radish Time. Um, and that book is all about the ways in which like communities, cities come together in times of like crisis and natural disaster. And
Mm.
like the way in which, and like her thing is people do this when there is need, and how do you generate this sort of like mutual aid driven society in times of not crisis, right? So going from that book into this one was really interesting to me because I kept having all of these little, like there were just little things that she would say that reminded me of this idea of like, I don't know, neighborhoods as like community, right? Like the point in both cases, I think like the thread, the unifying thread between that book's central arguments and this one is like the need for communities, and like
Mhm.
she talks about, I'm like, I have several tabs that I used specifically to highlight like those moments, things that made me think about that. She's talking about, you mentioned the financial like pieces of this as being a little
Yeah.
bit like whatever, but she like they're one of the places where basically redlining, she doesn't ever call it redlining. I don't know if that term was not like in popular use yet in 1961, but she talks a lot about redlining without ever using the term redlining. But like she mentions an area where a bunch of families like pooled money to buy back foreclosed buildings, and like that as a mechanism for I don't know, restoring a neighborhood or an area. I'm rambling. I've lost the plot here a little bit.
I thought it was interesting. I just forget where we started
Yep,
to.
same.
um, yeah. Yeah, I mean, because I think the word that like in the beginning that she used that I really liked is she talks about cities as like as strangers like living together basically. So the idea isn't necessarily that everyone has to be like when we say community, it doesn't have to be like a forced kind of, well, if anything, it shouldn't be forced,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be like everyone in this community is best friends with each other and that kind of
No,
thing.
no, no,
In
no.
fact, like that's what she says is like not the point at all. Like with the city, like there's like an expectation of privacy, of kind of like separation and boundaries, that it's different from like how we might use community in other ways. But yeah, so I like that idea of strangers because I feel like it also kind of parlays then into the ideas around diversity and mixed use and all of this stuff. Like the recurring theme, especially in the beginning of the book, is this idea that like we need to like let cities become places where there's always someone kind of around, and that means allowing for different types of uses. People who are like, so like you talked about before, like having like an area that's just office buildings means that you're only going to have people coming like walking across these areas at certain times of day, and so like
Right.
if you restrict it to that, that's not great. And then, same thing on the other end. If you have just like bars in an area, they're probably going to only be used at other times of the day. But if you mix them, you get people walking through at all times. And like there's sort of a general rhythm to it. And it means that there's like always people kind of around and just being part of a community, even if they're not consciously like, I'm checking into my community today. Like that's the community. It's like people using the space together.
Yes. Yeah. I think that this is interesting too, because I think that I feel like we maybe have I don't know, warped and distorted what a community is in that way, like because you get so hung up on this idea of like, oh, it's my friends or what, like that's not that isn't it though. Like it is a group of people with a vested interest in maintaining a space, like, or with like a shared interest in, like and like collaboratively maintaining a space together. I don't know. She doesn't ever use community as not, I mean, I shouldn't say ever, but that is not the way that she's speaking in terms of like neighborhoods and then districts and cities as sort of like the primary units that she's using. And it's all obviously super place bounded because that's the point here. But yeah, there's a lot here.
It's one of those where like there's so many different ideas that like I'm like, yeah, a lot of this sounds great and I believe it, but also like I don't know enough to know like what I agree and disagree with yet. And I feel like there's got to be something. Like she's got too many ideas in this book for me to like not disagree with something, but I have no idea what it would be, and I just like don't know enough to know yet. But it's a good like starting point. But yeah. That's what I was like thinking a lot of times while I was reading this book.
This, yes. So this is definitely a book where I wish that I had taken more time to, like, I don't know, explore subsequent work sort of in conversation with it. One of the things that is so interesting to me about this is the fact that it was published in 1961, and so there are lots of things that she is talking about that now feel really common sense, and I don't have enough of the context for, like the world that she was writing to. There are definitely some ideas about like there are some moments in the book where she's talking about certain government interventions as being sort of failed or bad in ways that made me a little bit uneasy, because it felt very like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like her point was, if these administrations did these things badly, then we should just not have them do anything. That which to me is like, well, no. Like we have them do something different then is the thing, not like do nothing.
That's interesting, because I wonder to what extent it's like really like she just kind of like, I think a lot of it she just like wants to rebuild the way that we approach city planning, because her basic argument, and I don't know how city planners are taught, so I'm kind of taking her on her word, is like that city planners are not like trained to actually think of cities as cities. They're like, and especially as how people who live in cities actually use cities. And so instead they're hung up on a lot of details that actively get in the way of cities becoming what they should become. So like, towards the end, like I feel like she gets into this whole idea of like structurally just like we need to approach like how these things are done politically completely differently, or like change the governance of it to reflect the ways that cities are actually kind of operating at a local level. So I think to that end, like I think she is very she is saying kind of like throw the baby out with the bathwater, because like her idea is like we need to just fundamentally change everything. But yeah, it's interesting because at the same time she was like, I was listening to the introduction of the book, and they were talking about like her kind of history of like activism or protesting with people like around like the areas that she was living in. So it's like clear she's also like basing this on an actual experience with the
Yeah.
government as it like works in that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
mentioned her contempt of city planners, and Colby actually just in the chat. I think she saw most city planners in the image of Moses. Definitely some gaps in understanding of the governance of cities. This is. I was gonna save this for later, but I have a whole section. These all the pink tabs are a selection of
The subtweets.
yes, Jane subtweeting city planners in her
And especially Robert Moses.
and most especially Robert Moses. My favorite thing about this book is how much Jane Jacobs hates Robert Moses. That's the best thing about this book. But analogies as to what goes on in the brains of earnest and learned men dealing with complex phenomena they do not understand at all and trying to make a point with pseudoscience do have a point. I should have read up higher on this, but she was talking about like medical analogies applied to social organisms. Social organisms are apt to be far-fetched, but city planners are fucking stupid.
Yeah.
it's her point.
Over and over and over again.
I have been making unkind remarks about orthodox city planning theory and shall make more as occasion arises to do so. It's like I don't know, she's just like so snarky, and it's my favorite thing about the book by far. Like and that's interesting. It was interesting to me when you compared this to Surveillance Capitalism, because in my brain I would categorize these books like leagues apart for that reason. You know what I mean? Like they're just like the whole, you can feel very deeply that like everything she is writing is definitely like entrenched in lived experience, and is I don't know, the product of an like active avoidance of engaging too heavily with academia. Like she's that is what she is not doing here. One thing she's not going to do.
I feel like this is like, it's like if Kara Swisher had written Surveillance Capitalism, I feel like that would be the vibe that like this book is, where it like would be that level of density, but with like also the additional snark. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The pseudoscience of planning seems almost neurotic in its determination to imitate empiric failure and ignore empiric success. Incredible.
Yeah.
Get him, Jane.
Yeah.
Drag him.
Yeah. But so that was what was interesting, is like I read it and like I think her arguments, they all make sense to me. And again, this goes to the fact that I feel like I don't know enough to like engage like as critically as I would want to with them, because a lot of her arguments are sort of and I think this is because I'm pretty sure she's a journalist, or right, so like she's delivering it as a story almost, right? Like she's telling stories of these individual areas. And so what's hard for me, like from my vantage point, is she might be totally correct, but I also don't know to what extent are we like overgeneralizing based on particular stories that suit what she's talking about. Like I agree from my personal experience, right? I like had this one experience walking on this one street, and I'm like now convinced that all quiet streets in cities are like bad, terrible, right? Like especially if they're like in Williamsburg, right? Like I'm happy to write a book based on that, but I don't know, right? Like, so that was one of the things, like, and there are times where she brings out numbers. There's times where she does bring out specific evidence, but again, it's hard to tell because she is making such a broad argument. Like, I was really left wondering, like, how broadly can we use this to describe cities? To what extent are these functions of the individual cities? And I think she does try to kind of address that. Like, she does say, like, that there's room for things to be not the way that she's saying them, or that like there are things in her argument that may not actually apply to like all cities. But that was one of those gaps that I was kind of left with.
That's interesting to me, in that that actually feels like part of her point on some level. Like what she is saying essentially is that city planners, as she understands them, are so entrenched in this like academic I don't know, modeling and simulating sort of understanding of a space, and are not like actively engaging with people in this way that I don't know, I like hearing everything you said tracks and like relatable when I also feel like I don't know enough about this to like have a clear understanding. But also hearing you say that, I'm like, oh, but isn't that the point though, that like that we're not that we're not that we should be engaging more with stuff, maybe not necessarily her, but like with people like her saying, okay, no, but this is, I fucking live here. I live here. This is my home. And I am telling you that this is what the experience of my home is. And like, why are you ignoring people who live here, people who live in cities, in your understanding? And like, this is another thing she talks a lot about, is like basically people trying to make cities more like suburbs, like as that's the goal. And it's like, no, we choose to live in cities. We've chosen to be in a city, not in the fucking suburbs. So like, why are you trying to turn my city into a suburb? I don't know. Like part of her point seems to be like that you should be relying more on the knowledge of people living in a place, as opposed to I don't know, that there is like active harm in getting too academic and ivory tower about it, I guess.
Yeah, so I think that's like where she's like having to tread this really delicate balance, because she is making an argument that is clearly like again rooted in her personal experience, but she's generalizing it to all cities in a way that like we like in like, I think that's what is like the thing that is the gap for me. It's like because I totally agree, at least from like the way that she's describing city planners, I understand this. They are over engineering without listening to the people who actually live in the city. And I also don't like to be clear, I don't think that this is necessarily a bad thing about the book. I just think like it's one of those things that the book is inherently like limited in. Colby, that'd be great to pair the book with like another thing on activism or organizing. And what I really thought about was actually Ghosts in the Schoolyard. While I was reading this book, I kept thinking back to that, because it's a lot about this idea of like the city comes in with this big policy that they say is going to like improve everyone's education, but then actually, because they haven't really listened to the people who are being affected by this policy, like they're actually making things much harder for the families and for the kids who are like having to go to these other schools. Like, and it's like that, those two books really, it made me really want to revisit Ghosts in the Schoolyard, because it felt like very much the specific concrete example of like the actual specific problem that she's describing, which I like very much agree with, like as a thing that probably exists. I assume like it doesn't run contrary to my experience of the world that like that people would do that.
That's Ghost in the Schoolyard is a really good example. The thing that I kept thinking of, partially because Saul Alinsky is mentioned multiple times in like he comes up in footnotes, he comes up in the like introduction, just sort of as like a contemporary. I had to like look up the year of publish. Rules for Radicals came out a decade later in 1971, but is very like, it's, if you haven't read it, it is like very retrospective. No. Saul Alinsky was a community organizer, and this book is like, I don't know, it's like a core text on community organizing, and he wrote this book describing like decades of like, so some of what he is talking about in that book is very much in line with like the timing, what he was writing about and what she was writing about is going to line up pretty closely. It's been many years since I read Rules for Radicals, to be clear. But anyway, to Colby's point about wanting wanting to pair this with another book about like activism and organizing and stuff like that. That was the thing that most immediately came to mind for me, was that, especially because they were both contemporaries. And so like it would be interesting to me to, I don't know. Reading this, I was like, oh man, I kind of want to go like pick that back up and sit back. That book also is much shorter, which is nice. Would be much easier for me to dive back into. But anyway, as a to juxtapose some of what she is talking about in terms of like this idea of like community organizing is also like that is running throughout this book. Like she keeps kind of referring back to it throughout. And it's very interesting, I guess, is all I have to say.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing, and like we can talk about the last chapter, the entire book, like she had sort of referred to like the idea of comparing cities to mammalian bodies early on, but then didn't like, she was just kind of like, yeah, it's there. And then, but like the entire book, I was like, she's just describing like ecology, like everything she's talking about is like ecology. And like, then later I was also for me coming from like working with like mammalian cells and like in genetic engineering, like a lot of these same things are also things that I think I've thought about like from the experience of like think about how you design a therapy that goes into a body, like a body as an ecosystem. Like there's so much that like I just felt the whole time, like I wrote in my notes somewhere, I was like, this is like ecology, this is like mammalian bodies, this is like complex systems. And then I got to the last chapter, it's like, yes, we're here. We're going to dive fully into the metaphor.
Yes. Yeah. The last chapter, so great, so lovely. I underlined so many things in that last chapter, but it was more just like quotes that I liked than any sort of, here's a discussion point. I also like related to this,
and this is like where the timing of the book is interesting, because she published this in the 60s when life sciences research was in a different place than it is now. And I'm like very curious, like, because the structure of this is like she's like she's referring to the speech given by someone about like the history of science, and talking about how we went from solving like basically like very simple 2-variable kind of equations that were able to teach us a lot. Like we can learn about like gases, gravity, like all of these things, like just using these very simple kind of experiments where you just change one variable, like time, or you change temperature, and you just see the effect on one other thing. We figured out a lot from that. And then we moved on to, what was it? Disorganized complexity, where basically people were like, well, what if we thought about everything at once? And this is where you get a lot of advances in statistical mechanics, which like underlies a lot of just like weird physics things that like people figured out. And then we kind of moved on from that to what they then called organized complexity, I think is what it is. And that like really underlies a lot of life sciences questions where, they're not necessarily these very simple kind of like two variable kind of things, and they're not necessarily like we're going to consider everything in the world. They're going to be like these questions that are like kind of clearly organized into this like living thing, but that have a lot of complexity around it. And her argument is sort of that we need to be thinking about cities in this way and not reducing it to, in particular, like these very simplistic ideas, like this kind of 2-variable system of like, if I just plop in this building or this park, voila, a housing prices change, and like that fixes everything, right? Which I love, because I feel the thing that was fascinating to me, coming from like someone with the post millennium like shift into like biology, right? Century, I guess, an ultra millennium. Is that like I feel like a lot of our approach to bioengineering feels still very simplistic, because even though we understand it as complex, our ability to contend with all of that information feels still relatively simplistic. But I think that's also me being just like kind of down on biology, because we do have a lot of like capacity to like study a lot of things. And so like the effort is definitely there. Like I don't think people are actively trying to not think about variables, but we just a lot of times have a hard time integrating and thinking about our bodies as like these complex systems.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you mentioned the last chapter was interesting to read given the context of like where the life sciences were at the time versus like us, now reading it. Like what are, how do I ask this question? What are the, like, what like analogies did that like call to mind for you? Like what like trajectory things were you like when you're making that connection in your brain that like she is writing this at this moment in the life sciences, but now we're here.
Yeah.
Like
Part of it's more a question is of like what did it look like at that time? Because I know that yeah, people were understanding life as like this increasingly complex, complicated thing. But and she talks, oh, I mean, like maybe one thing, like one of the examples I think is the use of like taxonomic kind of categories and using that to bring order to some sort of like chaotic system, which is labeling all of these species. And this is like right at the edge, I think, of when we started to be able to do kind of phylogenetic analysis, where instead of just looking at organisms and saying like how similar do they look together, we're going to group them together, we could now actually go into genetics and like dive into DNA and see like on a genetic level how closely related organisms were. And that took us from being able to say like, oh, all of these organisms look the same, so they must be related, to suddenly being like, oh, these organisms look the same, but they are not closely related at all. And it kind of like blew up a lot of these categories. Like my personal favorite example is like amoebas are like this category of organism that like actually used to define a given like category of organisms that just look like blobs. Like we're like, they look like blobs, they must be related. Instead, it turned out that it's not. And so amoebas became like a bunch of different families of organisms. And now amoeboid is really more an adjective than like an actual specific type of organism. And so that's one where like just the amount of information that we've been able to generate about life, like gather about life, has gone up so much in the past few decades, where it's just like, I kind of wonder to what extent we could even call it organized complexity when really we're like the amount of data we're generating and gathering is like going up so much. But I don't know. I think like we're still gonna have to, like, that's the thing. I mean, this is a lot like of my own personal crises from working on Journey to the Microcosmos, like ongoing crisis. Like, why do we even try to name things anymore? Like, what are the point of labels? And it turns out they do have like a lot of use. Like, they are very, very helpful. So I think there is like, I think the idea of having organized complexity to describe life sciences is actually like pretty meaningful. But yeah, I think a lot of what I'm left with is just wondering what it looked like in the 60s versus now. Because the other thing is I could be wrong. Like, I think we're always like, oh, generations ago, they didn't know. Like, what could they have possibly have known? And and then you realize like, oh, people knew. Like, people knew these things.
People knew these things. Which, I mean, that actually also is sort of a thing here too, right? In that like so much of like all of the ways in which some like things that she is talking about now feel common sensey, right? Where you're like, okay, but yeah, so clearly people did know, right? Like this is true, I don't know, across human history, where you're like, well, people didn't know things then. It's like, well, no, I don't, just because one guy who wrote a book or like was in power or whatever didn't know better doesn't mean people didn't know better. Like other people didn't know. So
but our generation figured it out first.
Yeah,
no one else did.
We're very smart.
Yeah.
So, okay. Anything? What else? Other big thoughts, themes, feelings, takeaways.
I just like, I think this book was like really, really interesting, and it made me really want to like follow up and learn more about city planning in a way that I like. Because I feel like, so like I've been traveling, right? Like I've been going, like I've been in Oslo, and then I've been traveling to a few other cities in Europe. And so like as I was reading this book, I was kind of like, can I see any of what she's talking about when I'm in these other cities? But I feel like I don't yet. Like, not because like what she's saying is wrong, but because I am still like internalizing like sort of the lessons of it. And I think also one of the lessons of the book is that you see it when you are in it, like when you are of the city. And so like coming from the outside as a tourist, a lot of those elements are probably going to be missing for me because I'm not actually living in that place and like experiencing it firsthand.
But like, no, but she talks about like visitors too. I think that like your experience of, you know, the one street in Williamsburg, like that's an experience that you have like on an innate level as a visitor, right? Like where you're like, vibes are bad.
Sure.
Like you don't know
Yeah.
why you like, so you, I don't know, I feel like you do experience it. It's just it's different because it's not the same level of like, I know not to go to X, Y, and Z neighborhoods because of my like intuitive, like I live here, you know, that sort of knowledge. But you do have it in like, just, you know, the more time you spend in cities, the more likely you are to have that experience of turning onto a street or like approaching, like reaching a part of the city where like for reasons you cannot articulate, you're just like, mm-mm. And like I think it's just like, I'm like, no, now I can articulate it, I know what it is. It's like there's no fucking people here, and that's weird, and I don't like it. I'm in a major city and there's no people. Bad.
Yeah.
That's okay, wait, this is a total absolute tangent, not a real thing. I'm watching, what is this show called? Chloe Grace Moritz. It's on Amazon Prime. It's airing now. It's like it's like a science fiction show. But this is like a thing that happens. She, because of science fiction magic, is suddenly like in London in the future, and that was a spoiler. I apologize.
That's okay.
The Peripheral is the name of the show. Sorry, I had this moment of like, oh no, I apologize.
I was about to say, it can't be a spoiler if I don't know the name of the show.
That's true. But anyway, that's her first. It's like part of the big mystery of the show. I mean, I haven't seen all of the show. I've only seen half. It's 5 episodes, so I don't know, man. Maybe none of this matters. But she has this like her first like note on being there. She's like, no, this isn't real because where the fuck are all the people? Like, I don't like this is, that's like her, I don't know, like in context, like I don't believe what you are telling me about where we are right now because there are no people, and that doesn't make sense because we're in a city. So, you know, whether you're in the real world or fake worlds, that's your clue that something is wrong.
Yeah, because that, like, I mean, I know I keep referring to the street, but it was like really the weirdest experience. Like, and I've been in like, I mean, I've been in cities where I've been like on a quiet street, but like, you know the difference between like quiet and quiet, right? Like, it was weird.
Yes.
Very odd. I did not like it. I like have not walked.
Yeah. The vibey part of it too is so interesting, especially when you think about like, I don't know, like describing. I don't know, having like gone to college and grad school in major cities, and when I describe certain experiences of that period in my life to friends and family who are not city people, there are all these moments where I'm like, I hear how this sounds like I'm about to get murdered.
Right.
I don't know what to tell you to make you understand why I never once feared that I was about to get murdered. But I promise you, I knew I wasn't about to get murdered. Like at any point in this story. And my explanation is just at the time would have solely been vibes. Like it's just this is an okay place for me to be. I don't know why. I just know that it is. And it's all going to be fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I mean, probably I made lots of choices that were bad also. Both things can be true here. But it's neither here nor there.
Sometimes I wonder if that's a story about being in a city or a story of being young.
You know, as I was talking, it occurred to me that might be the case.
I too look back on some of my stories and I'm like, was that a good choice? But I'm still here for now. So
you know, we've made it this far. So
yeah.
All right. Well,
was there anything? Thank you, Colby.
Thank you, Colby.
For validating.
What a journey we've been on today through the death and life of great American cities and the death and life of our youth.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, final thoughts on this
I'm
book?
sorry, this is not really, but just like the other day, someone was asking, because I did study abroad in Copenhagen, and I was in college, and someone was asking, like, how do you think about, like, do you prefer Oslo or to Copenhagen? And I was like, I don't think I can even compare them, because, like, I was in Copenhagen as a 20-year-old. My experience of that city is, like, so different from the way that I've, like, experienced a city in my 30s, right? Where I'm, like,
Yeah.
not, like part of what was exciting about going to Copenhagen was, like, I could drink there, right?
Right.
Like, because I was 20 at the time and couldn't drink in the US. So, like, that was, like, one of the superficial things that was fun about it. And then, like, I was there as a student. Like, that's a very different experience. Like, I guess we, like, even our own city experiences contain multitudes. Like,
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah,
yeah.
and you travel differently as the older you get,
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
yes. My little brother and I backpacked when I was 20 and he was 16. We had Eurail passes and backpacked around Europe. And when I think about the manner, like sleeping in train stations and like,
Right.
no fucking way would I do any of that now. Absolutely
Yeah.
not. Absolutely
Yeah.
not. I will not be sleep at a train station. Are you kidding? Like, I did a sleeper train once in my like late 20s, and I was like, I'm too old for this. I spent one night on a train, and I was like, no, I don't like this. I'm not happy. So anyway.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about what we're gonna
on that note.
On that note, that is definitely related to this book. Let's talk about our next book.
Yeah. So next month we're going to be reading Virology by Joseph Osmundson. Subtitle is Essays for the Living Dead and Small Things in Between. This was published, I think, last year. I've been really excited to read this. Disclosure, I guess I got this from the publisher, and I've been meaning to read it for a while, and it was like one of two books that I brought with me here, because the other one was the other nonfiction book club book that we read, The Battle of Versailles. So this is the other book I brought, and so I want to prioritize reading it, partially also because I realized that I much prefer doing nonfiction book club with a physical book, so I might as well use the one other physical
book that you have. Yes.
Exists. Yeah. And I think we're doing that
December 10th.
Yes, we should check. Yes, 10th. Yeah, sorry, pretty sure I said the wrong date last month for today, but we're all here.
We're all here. We made it. We got here. You, me, and Colby.
Yeah,
the gang is all here. So that's all that matters. And Colby, does that time work for you? December 10th at noon. Cool. Well, that's it.
Awesome.
I guess I'll drop into the we mentioned two other books that I was going to say I'll drop them in the chat, but I'll put them in the video description. Okay. Well, that was it then, I guess. Bye, everybody. See you next